Imagine a superhero who's lived for centuries, seen countless wars, and led entire nations. You'd expect someone who's grown wiser with every experience, right? But what if I told you that despite all his experience, he still repeats the same mistakes? Immortal, even with all the advantages of eternal life, keeps steering himself straight toward his own downfall. He gets killed by Omni-Man, comes back to life, and what does he do next? He makes the exact same mistake and gets himself killed again. He acts like the lessons he spent centuries learning were never even there in the first place. He doesn't grow, he doesn't change, and he definitely doesn't use the experiences we've seen him gain throughout the show. And that's exactly why Immortal is the worst written character in... As his name suggests, Immortal is a character who has lived for centuries and cannot die. He possesses super strength and the ability to fly. Physically, he's probably one of the strongest beings on Earth, but when it comes to enemies like the Viltrumites, he doesn't pose much of a threat. However, the real issue isn't his power level, it's how his character slowly falls apart the more we get to know him. Despite living for centuries, he doesn't seem to have a tactical mindset. With centuries of experience and a long history of battles, you'd expect him to have strong strategic instincts. Sure, he once led the Guardians, but as the series progresses, he rarely demonstrates the wisdom or strategic thinking you'd expect from someone with that kind of experience. This gap between his age and his wisdom is where Immortal's character really falls short. Think about what it truly means to live for centuries. We get glimpses of his past. He fought as a Celtic warrior, lived during King Arthur's time, and even served as Abraham Lincoln. But these fascinating details only make one thing clearer. He lacks the deep insight and perspective that should come from such a long life. Living through millennia of human history should have given Immortal a unique ability to read situations and people. He's witnessed countless betrayals, watched empires rise and fall, and should have learned to recognize patterns in human behavior that others simply can't. His lifetime of experience should be his greatest strength, even more valuable than his physical power. But the show presents him as little more than a strong man who's been around for a long time. The comparison becomes painfully obvious when you look at him next to Cecil. Despite being just a regular mortal, Cecil shows far more insight and strategic thinking, just like in the scene when he first encounters Omni-Man. The moment he sees him, he immediately realizes that a confrontation would result in his defeat, so instead of rushing into battle, he approaches Omni-Man with a more peaceful stance. He tries to understand his motivations, and when he returns, he starts working on countermeasures, saying, "No one in this universe gives something without expecting something in return." In the meantime, Immortal, the person who should have developed almost supernatural instincts after centuries of interacting with humans, seemed genuinely shocked when Omni-Man betrayed the Guardians. That reaction doesn't make sense for someone who's seen so many betrayals over the centuries, and should know how to spot hidden motives by now. But instead, he ended up dying at Omni-Man's hands while asking why. After his resurrection, the flaws in his character become even more obvious. When the Maulers brought Immortal back to life after Omni-Man killed him, what kind of plan did this centuries-old warrior have? Nothing. Instead, he acted out of anger and rushed into another fight with Omni-Man, and of course lost again. This reckless behavior completely contradicts everything we'd expect from someone with his experience. A being who has lived through countless conflicts should understand the foolishness of repeating failed strategies. He should know when to step back and look for alternative approaches. Most importantly, he should have developed the emotional maturity to control his anger, rather than letting it control him. Some people might argue that his resurrection and thirst for revenge cloud his judgment. However, for someone who has this much experience, it's surprising that he hasn't developed better emotional control. Immortal should still feel anger, that's human, but centuries of experience should have taught him that making impulsive decisions and acting out of anger is usually a bad strategy, leading to negative outcomes. This reckless behavior goes beyond his conflicts with Omni-Man. When Alan the alien appeared on Earth, Immortal's first reaction was to attack without asking a single question or attempting any form of communication. If Invincible hadn't intervened, this impulsive response could have cost Earth a valuable ally and critical information about the Viltrumite threat. A wiser Immortal, someone who had truly learned from centuries of existence, would recognize the value of gathering information before turning to violence. Perhaps the most striking example is during the Invincible War, when Immortal tries to take on No Goggles Mark in a one-on-one fight. This decision directly contradicts Immortal's confession in Season 2, Episode 6, where he acknowledges that Invincible is both stronger and faster. Yet somehow, during this situation, he completely forgets this critical information and rushes into battle with a more powerful opponent. Predictably, it ends in another defeat. These are just a few examples that come to mind, and I'm sure there are more. Yes, he often fought stronger opponents and displayed bravery, but most of it was impulsive and foolish. In almost every case, he rushed toward his death without thinking or making a plan. Honestly, I wish we could see more than just courage from Immortal. While not quite at Cecil's level, he deserved to stand out not just as the character rushing into battle at the front, but more as a commander in the back, someone whose influence on the outcomes was much greater. The main reason for my expectation is how well the creators of Invincible analyze concepts like immortality, ethics, and superpowers. In my previous video, I explained that Omni-Man's actions actually make sense from his character's perspective, and immortality plays a significant role in his psychology and power. But unfortunately, we can't say the same about Immortal, because when we think about what immortality really means, Immortal just doesn't live up to the expectations. These failures don't just reflect poorly on Immortal as a character, they also undermine the concept of immortality presented by the show. With all his potential and long history, Immortal should be written in a way that shows the wisdom you'd expect from someone who's lived for centuries. Just like in Season 3, Episode 4. In this episode, Mark leaves Immortal to rule the world, but after a while, Immortal loses his balance and starts ruling with an iron fist. He wanted Mark to return and kill him. This plotline makes perfect sense when we think about immortality. Immortal, despite being 1,000 years old, is still human, and his psychology might not be able to handle certain things. Burdened by the weight of his immortality, he ends up seeking his own death, even at the cost of harming those around him. He's been exposed to so much pain and loss that he just can't take it anymore. I think Immortal should have been approached from this angle from the very beginning. Yes, there's a bit of this explored in his relationship with Kate and in the comics, but there's no situation that truly impacts the story. Immortal should either have been a character with highly developed instincts, standing out as a leader, or, as we saw in the King Immortal episode, a character whose psychology completely deteriorates and spirals into madness. But he should never have been stuck between these two extremes. When we try to explain this, the first thing that might come to mind is that perhaps he doesn't remember much due to his long life. Maybe he's learned to erase his traumas from his memory, which could be why he hasn't reached the level of wisdom he should have. But even then, this seems like a distant possibility. Immortal's true tragedy isn't that he dies over and over again, it's that he dies for nothing, despite having all the time in the world. He never grows, never learns, never changes. The show misses the chance to turn him into something more than a powerful relic. An immortal shaped by centuries of lessons, carrying the scars and wisdom of history, could have added a whole new layer to Invincible's story. He should have been a strategist, a mentor, a symbol of what it means to endure. Instead, we just get flashes. Lincoln, King Arthur, but no real follow-through. The writers gave him eternal life, but never let him evolve. And in a series that often nails the complexity of power and responsibility, Immortal ends up as its biggest missed opportunity. Not because he can't die, but because he never really lived up to what he was meant to be. Thank you so much for watching. If you like my content, consider subscribing, and don't forget to leave a comment. I always enjoy reading your thoughts. See you next time.